Chapter 9. I had my first view of Jennytown late in the day when we hurried off the train to find a place to eat and sleep while there was light enough to see. There was no railroad station, just a shed with a watchman and a platform for unloading freight. There was little to explore in the town, 2 or 3 streets of squat, unpainted houses set haphazardly on a steep hillside. A dirt road bordered the town side of the railroad tracks, and a rocky river flowed along the other side. A few children played in the fading light, and men and women rested on benches in front of their homes. Jamie didn't know where his friend lived, but he quickly found out. "Gone," an old-timer said, after a spell of coughing. If this news disturbed Jamie, he didn't show it. "Whereabouts the sawmill?" "Shut down," the old man said. "Some of our timberland burned and your friend logged out the rest. Didn't know how to manage, folks says." Jamie could be good about disguising his feelings, but I saw he was angry. As though only mildly interested, he asked, "Is there a rooming house?" "Was." The old man bent over, coughing again, and when he came up, he nodded toward our valises. "You wanting a place to stay?" "Just for the night," Jamie said. "For the night?" I tried not to worry about what we might do the next day. "Mabel Morgan's got an extra bed," the man said. "She might be able to fix you something to eat. It'd be kind if you'd pay. She's a widow." "Of course I'll pay," Jamie said. "Don't take no offense. I say what's needed 'cause there's always folks who takes advantage. And Mabel's a good woman." The old man stood, walked us to another street, and pointed to one of the unpainted shacks. I smiled my thanks. "Much obliged," Jamie said. Jamie took my hand. "It'll be all right." "I know." We were both weary of travel and eager to be settled, but I began to hope that perhaps when we'd rested he'd think again about North Dakota. That night, Mabel Morgan fed us a hash of potatoes and egg, which she fried in grease over a fire outside so as not to heat up the house. The hash was delicious, and the bed was clean, but there was no privacy, because her house was a single room, and our bed was beside her own. I was glad not to be on the ground. The next morning, Jamie left the house to see about work, saying it would be all right if Mabel Morgan showed me the town. After she doused the breakfast fire, milked her goat, picked bugs off her potato plants, and took a pan of water to her chickens, we walked to the shack that served as post office, store, and lounging place for everyone too old to work. The store carried no great variety or number of goods, just a few items on 2 shelves. Mabel Morgan bought coffee beans, likely with the money Jamie had paid. I wondered how she lived, or for that matter, how anyone survived here. Most houses had only a small fenced garden plot and a few chickens. Since Jamie had gone to look for work, I was curious about what he might find. "There's only the tannery now," she said. "It's about a mile downriver. My man wouldn't work there. He never did like to take orders from nobody. He stripped hemlock bark and sold it to the tannery. He hunted and trapped and sold pelts and hides, and at times he salted fish from the river and shipped it in kegs on the train. He was a good provider." In other towns, I'd become familiar with the reeking odor of tanneries, caused by the bits of rotting flesh that remained on the hides. The stink got into a man's skin and wouldn't wash away, Jamie said. Mid-morning, Jamie returned to Mabel Morgan's house. "Hurry and pack up," he said. "Did you find us a house?" The morning had left me feeling good about Jennytown. It was a poor place, but the people were kind and helpful. "There's nothing here but a tannery. You'd hate me if I worked there." I couldn't imagine hating him, but I supposed he was of the same opinion as Mabel's husband. "A freight has stopped for water," Jamie said. "It's pulling out to Winkler in a few minutes." I shook Mabel's hand, and she pulled me into a hug. "You're a sweet child. I'm sorry you won't be my neighbor." "Maybe we can visit." She shook her head. "It won't be likely. Winkler's a far piece." "Will we get there today?" "Oh yes, you'll be there in a few hours." She and some of the villagers kindly waved us on our way. The freight train had no passenger car, just an engine, 1 boxcar with bawling cattle, 2 flat cars with strapped-down crates, and a red wooden caboose. At the railroad tracks, Jamie stepped aside and had a conversation with the freight conductor. then helped me up the steps into the caboose. Inside, we sat on a bench along the wall. "This is a favor for you," Jamie said, "on account of I said my wife couldn't ride on an open flat car." "Thank you," I said. "I'll thank him too." "That's been done," Jamie said. "You best not speak to strangers." Uncle Bert had said much the same thing, and I supposed he and Jamie knew more about the world than I did. "I'm sorry your friend wasn't in Jennytown," I said. "I liked it there. Do you know someone in the next town?" "A few," he said. "I hope to meet them." He frowned. "They're not what you'd call friendly types." I missed my cousins, and I was eager for a friend, even an old one like Mabel, though someone my own age would be better. "Is it a nice town?" He shrugged, like he didn't want to talk about it. "Good as any, I suppose," he said. "There's a church and school and a store." "Bigger than Jennytown, then," I thought. "Are there rooming houses?" "We'll have to see," he said. I wondered if we'd sleep out again because the slopes of Jennytown made me think there might not be many flat places of ground for lying down. And would there be wolves and bears in these forests? The engine was getting up steam. Outside, the conductor waved a flag toward the engineer, then jumped onto the rear platform of the caboose and came inside. The conductor was a talkative sort. I listened closely for hints of what my life would be like in Winkler, but he talked mostly about himself and his experiences working for the railroad company, limiting his remarks about Winkler to the sawmill and the rail yard. "It's a big operation," he said. "Lumber camps all up and down the mountains send their logs to the big sawmill in Winkler. Winkler's the name of the company. Winkler's a company town." I didn't say anything, but I suppose I looked quizzical, because he said, "That means the company owns and bosses the whole town. Return trip will carry out a load of sawed lumber, all the way to Lewisburg, then it goes east." The engine slowed and stopped. "Switchback," the conductor said, going to the door. "Stay put." I watched out the window but couldn't see where he'd gone. Then slowly we backed up onto a different track and the train stopped again. After a long pause, the conductor came back to the caboose and the train went forward again. "A switchback is a kind of zigzag for places where the grade's too steep or the curve's too tight," he said. At last the train slowed and the conductor said we'd come to Winkler. He got out and the train backed up again, then he came back to the caboose. "We unlinked the cattle car here," he said. "You might want to get off, and 'cause I gotta wait till it's unloaded and the yardman and me agrees about the numbers, and after that, we'll go on to the lumber dock." He tipped his cap. "Good luck, missus." I nodded and he smiled. Jamie led the way with our valises, and I followed in the cindered ground between the railroad ties, watching my steps while glancing toward the hillside houses. White plumes of smoke lifted from a cluster of buildings along the river. The air was full of blasts of steam, shrills of saws, and heavy thumps from the lumber docks. We climbed 4 steps to the platform of a 2-story brick building between the tracks and a busy street. A sign across the top of the building said, "Winkler Logging and Lumber Company." Doors from the platform were labeled office, waiting room, telegrams, and guards. "Here," Jamie said. "Stay here while I take care of things." I sat on a bench against the wall, and he set the valises on each side of me. "Don't," he began. I nodded. "I won't speak to anyone." We were the only people on the platform. "Sorry if I sound like an old woman," he said. "I worry too much. Is there a ladies' toilet in the waiting room?" "I'll see," he said. He was gone what seemed an endless time, but when he returned, he had a job and a key to the ladies' room. The job, however, was not to his liking. It was in a logging camp, and he said he'd be living there most of the week. I was confused. "We'll live in a camp?" He held out the key. "There's no places for women in logging camps. Don't worry, I'll take care of you." He'd get me a room or a house here in Winkler, I thought, and I'd have neighbors and hopefully a friend, maybe another young woman whose man worked in the camps. There could be many like that here. When I came from the ladies' room, he said, "We'll go to my brother's until I can figure this out. He's a poor host, so we'll go over to the store and see what we can take to eat." The street was busy with carts, wagons, and children of all ages chasing between them. I gawked at the houses as we crossed, hoping the people here would be as nice as Mabel Morgan and her neighbors in Jennytown. The man at the counter gave me a curious glance before addressing Jamie by name. "Well, Jamie Long, is it? Big plans didn't work out?" Instead of answering, Jamie handed the man the slip of paper he'd brought from the company office. "Set up my account. I'll have one of them loaves of bread, 10 boiled eggs, and a stick of beef sausage." The man wrapped and tied our items with string, then flipped the pages of an account book to a clean one and wrote Jamie's name and the amounts of his purchase. Jamie stuffed the items in his valise, then took my arm and ushered me from the store. We walked on the boardwalk until it ended, then crossed the street and walked on a path along the railroad tracks nearly to the end of town. Then he led me across the tracks to the river. "This is the fording place," he said. "We'll have to wade. If you got old shoes, you might want to put them on." "Couldn't we step across on the rocks?" "We might try, but they get mossy and slick, and you'd be apt to fall. Don't want you to hurt yourself." I put on my oldest shoes, a pair of brown, scuffed lace-ups. He kept a firm grip on my hand as we walked through the water, while I did my best to hitch up my dress so the hem wouldn't get too wet. With such tender care, I couldn't complain. Besides, I knew he was disappointed. He hadn't got a job at the mill like he'd wanted, but he was putting a good face on that. I could too.